Taiwan and Tibet actually China's Achilles heel? And is it then a double whammy for Beijing that Tibetans in Taiwan are very keen to invite His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama to Taiwan? He has, of course, been to this self-governed democratic island thrice in the past. What signal would the Supreme Tibetan spiritual leader visiting a democratic Taiwan send out to Beijing and to the world? I'm Gaurav Sawant. We'll get to the latest on this big story, especially after Dalai Lama recently spoke of change in situation in China being imminent. He was in Ladakh. But first, as always, the headlines. Suspended BJP MLA T. Raja Singh arrested for the second time in 3 days over his prophet remark, accuses the KCR government of manufacturing a controversy. Asaduddin Owaisi condemns the Sar Tan Se Juda call but secures release of his leaders and cadre chanting Sar Tan Se Juda. Relief for the centre in the Pegasus Snoopgate case. Supreme Court panel says there is no proof of spyware in 29 phones that were examined. BJP says this is vindication, demands an apology from Rahul Gandhi. Supreme Court issues a notice to the centre and to Gujarat government for granting remission to Bilkis Bano's rapists. 11 convicts made party to the case. Gandhigiri over Delhi Liquorgate scandal. Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal visits Rajghat. BJP says Bewdi Sarkar is using Gandhi as a shield to deflect attention. Election Commission recommends Hemant Soren's disqualification as an MLA for awarding a mining contract to himself. The Chief Minister of Jharkhand cries foul, says BJP headquarters is controlling central agencies. Big twist in BJP leader and actor Sonali Phogat's death investigations. Autopsy report mentions multiple blunt force injuries on her body. Goa police now registers a murder case. Her personal assistant is being questioned by the police. We begin India first with an India Today exclusive report from Taiwan. The Tibetans in Taipei are very keen to invite His Holiness the Dalai Lama to seek his blessings again. They've made preparations. They've also sent out a letter of request to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Taiwan. Incidentally, His Holiness has visited Taiwan 3 times in the past. The last visit was in 2009, but none after fiercely independent and strong President Tsai Ing-wen was sworn in 2016. Will he visit anytime soon? And what message goes out to Beijing? India Today's Foreign Affairs editor Geeta Mohan in Taipei with this report.
There is now a rising clamor in Taiwan amongst the Tibetan people to invite His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, spiritual leader of the Tibetan people, to Taiwan again. India Today went to the office of the representative of the Dalai Lama in Taipei on the 10th floor of a building on the Keelung Road. Mingyur Youdon, a young Tibetan representative from Dharamsala in Himachal Pradesh, India, is currently posted in Taipei. The representative of the Tibetan people in Taipei is Kelsang Gyatsen, who told India Today that there was tremendous enthusiasm amongst not just the Tibetan people living in Taipei, but also amongst the people of Taiwan to listen to His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
We received a lot of requests appealing for His Holiness Dalai Lama's visit in Taipei. We prepared a presentation for Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I have informed them of the requests. We would like to see a visit of His Holiness.
His Holiness the Dalai Lama has visited Taiwan thrice in the past. In 1997, 2001 and 2009. However, an increasingly assertive China is trying to force its will on Taiwan, including recently objecting to the visit of US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to the self-governed island, which is a democracy.
Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan is not only for Taiwan and US economic and trade relations, but it gave out a big message of democracy and human rights around the world.
The fact that China's coercive action, even after Nancy Pelosi's visit, did not lead to a conflict, has exposed the level to which China can coerce a democratic elected government of Taiwan.
In the recent past, China has been rather sensitive about His Holiness the Dalai Lama and about the issue of Taiwan. And therefore, these red lines being breached is a huge provocation for China. Having said that, the community over here now believes that if top delegations from the United States of America can come, it is time that they reach out to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Taipei to engage and see if His Holiness the Dalai Lama could come once again.
First, the visit of Nancy Pelosi, followed by a bipartisan delegation from the US, and then Japan, has exposed the limits of China's military and economic coercion. During her visit to Taiwan, even Nancy Pelosi raised the issue of Chinese atrocities and trampling democracy and human rights in Hong Kong, Tibet and Xinjiang. His Holiness the Dalai Lama also visited Leh in Ladakh, travelling on board an IAF Dhruv advanced light helicopter and spending time with the people in Ladakh and the armed forces engaged in a tense standoff with the Chinese army in illegal occupation of Tibet. With Geeta Mohan in Taipei, Bureau Report, India Today.
His Holiness is on a month-long sojourn to Ladakh these days. He, of course, is scheduled to fly back to Delhi on Friday. Incidentally, when he was in Ladakh, the 14th Dalai Lama flew on board an Indian Air Force helicopter to a remote village. China gets very upset when His Holiness the Dalai Lama visits places of spiritual significance for Tibetans in India. For example, Tawang in the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh. India and China are locked in a fierce standoff at the LAC in Ladakh. There are more than 50,000 Indian soldiers and about 50,000 Chinese soldiers deployed now with heavy artillery, armor and long-range missiles along the LAC. Now, during his month-long sojourn in Ladakh, His Holiness addressed the Tibetan community at Choglamsar. He told this generation of Tibetans in India about the conditions in the communist regime that forced him to leave Tibet and seek shelter in India. He said, and I quote, "I decided to leave the Norbulinka on the 9th of the 17th of March around 10. Before I left, I bid farewell to the protected Mahakala, whose statue stood in one of the prayer halls. Towards the end of our precarious journey to freedom, as we approached the border with India near Tawang, we received a message that the government of India would make us welcome. It was such a relief to be met by Indian officials, some of whom I had befriended when I came to India to join the Buddha Jayanti celebrations in 1956, unquote. Are democracies pushing back against an expansionist China? Joining me on India First, Tenzin Lekshe is the spokesperson of the Tibetan government in exile at Dharamsala, the CTA or the Central Tibetan Authority, and of course Professor Brahma Chilani at the Center for Policy Research, one of the most authoritative voices on China. But Mr. Lekshe, I want to begin by asking you. Recently, His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Leh was quoted saying, "Change in situation in China is imminent. Exiled Tibetans should remain strong. Times are changing. Truth shall prevail." Can you elaborate? What does this mean, sir?
Good evening. So the truth has to prevail at the end. And Tibet issue or the Tibetan conflict, and the Tibetan conflict has been a long-standing conflict which exists for more than around 70 years. So for us, it's a matter of hope and a matter of truth. If there's a truth, it has to be prevailed. So this, I think, for the Tibetan, because we have the truth, and we know that even though there is a generation change, we have a fourth generation now, fifth generation is coming up. We are scattered and to different countries. But among the Tibetans who are in exile, the matter is that our aspirations, whatever we do, has to look beyond Himalaya, inside Tibet, and to see what are the aspirations for the Tibetans inside Tibet. So therefore, no matter how long it is, the matter is that the truth has to be prevailed.
Truth shall prevail. When he says change is imminent, what does that mean? And I'll come back to you for that. But Professor Brahmachalani, His Holiness visited Taiwan thrice in the past, 97, 2001, 2009, and he's been invited again. Now, after Nancy Pelosi's visit, would the fourth visit, should it happen, be any different?
Well, the difference now is that the Dalai Lama is advancing in age. He just turned 87 last month. He has received invitations from a number of countries, but he really goes overseas now, given his advanced age. So given that reality, a visit by the Dalai Lama to Taiwan doesn't look feasible at this particular time, not because of the China factor, not because Taiwan doesn't want Dalai Lama to come. On the contrary, the Taiwanese government and Taiwanese people would like Dalai Lama to come. But given the fact that he's 87 and that he is not keeping well, I'll be very surprised if he were to undertake any
What
trip
message,
to Taiwan.
Professor Chilani, would it send to Beijing? Is it poking the dragon in the eye?
Well, the problem for China is that any visit, any action, however small, is seen by Beijing as provocative. For example, when the Indian president or prime minister visits an Indian state, Arunachal Pradesh, Beijing protests. So Dalai Lama going to Taiwan definitely would be an action from the Chinese perspective, an action that China would perceive as being highly provocative. But it's important to remember the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is why the Dalai Lama is in India in the first place. The Tibetan frontier with India was largely peaceful for centuries.
Yes.
Before China occupied Tibet in 1951. And with its conquest of Tibet, China enlarged its landmass by more than 1/3. In one stroke, it expanded its landmass by 1/3, and no less importantly, it altered Asia's geostrategic landscape. So we have to remember that China historically was never India's neighbor.
Oh, absolutely.
It imposed itself as India's neighbor.
Tenzin, let's say at Choglamsar in Ladakh, addressing a gathering of perhaps around 6,500 Tibetans in India, His Holiness also said things will change for the better in China before long. You know, change is imminent, change for the better. What does this mean for Tibetans in Tibet and Tibetans in exile?
You see, the change is the most constant thing which obviously has to happen, right? There's nothing but the change which has to happen. So when you look at Tibet, even though how the torturous, right, how belligerent China is right now, but the Chinese leader need to understand that if there have to be the responsible citizen or the responsible leader in the world, they have to be benevolent. So belligerence cannot work, right, at this age. So therefore, what they have to do is they have to make a kind of a benevolent. They have to take the role of a benevolence. But somehow there is a difficulty. So therefore, what we see in all over the world, the geopolitics, whatever it is, right, that China need to take a different stand. So for that, I think the change is imminent. Right. So the Chinese leader need to understand there is a change of leadership.
Okay.
Right, which is going to happen. So what we see is change is constant. And
Change
for China,
of leadership is going to happen. On what basis are you saying? Because by all accounts, the information is that Xi Jinping will get another 5-year term. He's anyways chairman of everything, and he intends to be president for life.
So you never know. In the world history, you never know what is going to happen. But ultimately, it is the hope, it matters for the people who are deprived of the human rights, deprived of the freedom, deprived of the justice. Right? And for Tibetan, we have been longing for freedom for the last 70 years. Right? So therefore, while taking into consideration of what's happening inside Tibet, which is critical, which is more critical than what's happened over the past, so therefore we see that the change will be the imminent. But
change will be imminent, you say, and what's happening inside Tibet, and I'll just come to you in a moment for that. Professor Chilani, is this a double whammy for Chinese President Xi Jinping? China desperately wants to keep Tibet and Taiwan out of global focus, both at this moment, all eyes both on Taiwan and of course on His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
Well, just last year in July, Xi Jinping made an unannounced visit to Tibet.
Yes.
And that visit began near the heavily militarized border with India. That visit really showed the centrality of Tibet in Xi Jinping's domestic policy. He is pursuing a two-pronged Tibet policy. On one hand, he is seeking to rapidly Sinicize Tibetans and the unique Tibetan culture and turn Tibet, in his own words, into quote-unquote impregnable fortress.
Yes.
Second, he is also seeking to expand China's territorial control beyond Tibet's borders. This has prompted China's ongoing border aggression against India and also its land grabs in tiny Bhutan. So given this reality, given this background, India must work to frustrate Xi Jinping's plan to install a pawn to succeed the current Dalai Lama.
Yes.
Dalai Lama has said that his reincarnation will appear in a free country, not in an autocratic country, but in a free country. So acting on that directive of the Dalai Lama, Tibetan exiles could be helped to find and appoint the successor once the current Dalai Lama passes away. India should have a plan in place because the Chinese have a plan and India cannot be found wanting when the situation arises.
That's a very pertinent point you make. And when you say China now has designed, so 1951, China occupied Tibet, now wants to go beyond. Are you talking about the 5 fingers of the palm that China hopes to occupy Arunachal Pradesh, Sikkim, Nepal, Bhutan and Ladakh, Professor Chilani?
Well, the 5 fingers strategy of Mao remains integral to Chinese policy even today. And if Taiwan were to fall to China, you can be sure about one thing, that Arunachal Pradesh will become the target of China's strategy. This is not to suggest that they'll be able to grab Arunachal Pradesh.
Yes.
But they will turn up the heat on that state. And that state is not a small area. It's almost 3 times as large as Taiwan. So Taiwan is critical to India's security, and India has to do what it can to contribute to shoring up Taiwan's defenses.
Good point you make there. 90,000 square kilometers of Arunachal Pradesh, and especially the spiritual town of Tawang is what China is looking at. Tenzing, let's say, what's happening inside Tibet? What information do you have, given the extensive Chinese military deployment and reports of repression and desperate attempts at sinicization in Tibet?
So far, for understanding, right, under Xi Jinping since 2012, right, we see that there is a worsening of the situation inside Tibet, and the sinicizations of Tibetan culture and identity, language, and Buddhism has been in full swing, right? So there is a dire state of sinicizations and assimilation of Tibetan identity and culture, which I think is the root of the Tibetan identity. So therefore, we are proposing, therefore, over the last so many years, that the middle way policy should be the viable solution to resolve the Sino-Tibetan conflict, so that it'll be a win-win solution, not just for the Tibetan people, but also for China. So China needs to understand that, as I said before, the belligerence cannot be the solution, right?
But very clearly, Xi Jinping doesn't seem to be understanding that language, given the fact that when he came to Tibet, he was barely a couple of kilometers away from Arunachal Pradesh, the kind of military deployment that's taking place in Tibet even as we speak. But Professor Chilani, the visit of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to Leh, then flying to a remote village, Lingshed, on board an Indian Air Force Dhruv advanced light helicopter, is this some kind of a signal that India is sending out to China?
Well, not really, Gaurav, because Dalai Lama, as the spiritual leader of people who follow Tibetan Buddhism, visits these communities, Himalayan communities, regularly, from Ladakh to Sikkim to Arunachal Pradesh. He regularly visits these communities, and the fact that he has undertaken this trip to remote areas, despite the fact that he has turned 87, is remarkable. It's remarkable that at his age, he's going to places where young people may not like to go.
Yes.
And that shows his dedication, his determination, his optimism, his belief that while he's alive, there would be a sea change in Tibet, a sea change that is positive for Tibetans. So he's a beacon of hope, a beacon of inspiration for so many millions across the world.
Oh, he absolutely is. But as you rightly pointed out, he is 87 in the autumn of his life. But Tenzin Lekshe, India, you know, as Professor Brahmachilani also very rightly pointed out, India didn't share a border with China till China occupied Tibet by force. Is the world now seeing the reality of China's occupation and sinicization of Tibet, or does the fear of the dragon remain, and these reports are not being highlighted, especially by the West?
See, obviously, the history tells that Tibet was never a part of China, but China brutally occupied Tibet in 1951 to 59. So history is one part. Now, Professor Burma was right, because India never shared border with China in the history. Tibetan shared the border with India, right, for time immemorial. So, but China occupied Tibet, forcefully occupied Tibet, and many countries, by the reason of one China policy, felt that the Tibet issue is an internal issue. But somehow it was not. So therefore, over the last 60 years, taking into considerations of what's happening inside Tibet, how critical it is right now. So the Tibetan government or the leadership and His Holiness has envisioned a proposal where the Tibetan can enlist, right, to preserve their own identity, culture, language, environment, which is not just for the sake of Tibetan, but also can help the world with the Tibetan sacred.
Absolutely, but that's exactly what Xi Jinping is trying to trample under Chinese army jackboots in Tibet. But Professor Chilani, China is desperately seeking a reiteration of one China policy, whether it's Taiwan or Tibet. But is this a setback for Beijing? Even late External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj in 2014 said, for India to accept one China policy, Beijing must reiterate a one India policy. Is this again a red rag to the bull?
Well, let's be clear on one thing. Tibet remains at the center of the China-India divide. And India is paying a heavy price for recognizing and thereby legitimizing China's conquest of Tibet. Today, China is claiming Indian areas not on the basis of any Han-Chinese links to them, but on the basis of alleged Tibetan links to them.
Yes.
So by adhering to this one China policy, India is only emboldening Chinese territorial claims to Indian areas. So time has come for India to do what the then Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj had said publicly,
yes,
which is that the one China policy of India would be linked to China's pursuit of a one India policy. If China is not pursuing a one India policy, if China is actually seeking to dismember India and laying claims to large parts of India,
yes,
then how can India pursue a one China policy?
Oh, absolutely. We will continue to discuss this in the days and weeks ahead. But again, will His Holiness the Dalai Lama visit Taiwan? What signal does his visit to Ladakh send out? Are democracies actually pushing back against an expansionist China? For joining me here on this India Today special broadcast, Tenzin Lekshe and Professor Brahma Chilani, many thanks.